Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Pit Talk, Polling Pits and Opinions with your host, Gunny G. We're service members help service members, period. Follow, like, subscribe everywhere you get your podcast and on all social media platforms. Let me know how I'm doing. Any criticism is good criticism. Let's get into it. We got a special guest by the name of Hayden Gamarra. I hope I said that right.
You did.
Sweet. Okay. Hayden, give me a quick background and say hello to the listeners, and let's get started, yeah?
Yeah. Awesome. Gunny, I appreciate you having me on. Anytime I can, help service members, both past and present, I jump at the opportunity, so I really appreciate your time. A little bit about myself. Grew up in South Carolina. Went to college down at the Citadel. I'm a little bit of a different breed of individual just from my career pathway is a little unorthodox. Some might think it's backwards, but I'm sure we'll get into that stuff. So went to college, studied biology, and then got into med device sales. Had a super lucrative career doing that, but recognized that all my friends that I went to college with were in Iraq and Afghanistan, either in the Marine Corps, in the Army, special operations, conventional, what have you, all doing like awesome things. And I was looking at my bank account grow, and as miserable as I've ever been in my life. Right? So, I was chasing fulfillment, and it's kind of been a path of my life thus far. Luckily, I learned that very early on that money doesn't buy happiness. So I willingly and very happily took that salary reduction to go into the Marine Corps. So I showed up to OCS, went the route, nasty officers to back in January 2018, commissioned, did TBS, which is the basic school. If I'm sure your listeners are familiar with that. Did pretty well there, graduated top 5%, was actually commissioned as a reserve officer. But for graduating top 5% at the TBS, I was offered an active duty commission and took that, and then was career designated out of the basic school. From there, went to artillery school out in Fort Sill, and reported to 7th Battalion 10th Marines back in June of 2019. Immediately went out to an ITX, cut my teeth shooting 155 howitzers, towed artillery out in 29 Palms, and was at first a fire direction officer, did the platoon commander thing after that for about a month or two. So super early on in my career, I became an executive officer of Easy Battery 210 out in Camp Lejeune, and started preparing for a deployment. That was roughly 2020, 2021 time. I went on the 2-4 MEU that ended up actually going out to Hamid Karzai International Airport out in Kabul, Afghanistan in August of 21. So I was on the ground for any of the listeners are familiar with what happened back then. I'm sure they all saw CNN with like the refugees falling off the aircraft and the extraction of all U.S. and NATO forces. So I was an XO and interim provisional rifle company commander on the ground there. Had about 150 Marines that we did some incredible things out there. Couldn't be proud of the guys that I worked with. Absolutely phenomenal human beings. So to fast forward, get through that deployment, had the inclination to try to go drop a packet to go to MARSOC, go to ANS and do the ITC thing to be, the flight operator in the Marine Corps. Drop a packet, start the medical process, and actually get disqualified medically for some vision issues I've got. I couldn't go to dive school. I couldn't get LASIK or PRK. So that's ultimately why I decided to transition to the Army and do what I do now. So right now I'm Green Beret and the Army and Army National Guard. For those of your listeners that haven't been familiar, it's essentially special forces in the Army. So I actually went to selection, SFAS, Special Forces Assessment Selection, in January of 22 as an officer. I had not promoted to captain yet. I was a senior first lieutenant coming back from the deployment. My battalion, luckily, was happy with, I guess, my performance, and I had a very supportive battalion commander and supporting me to go to that. So I showed up bright-eyed, bushy-tailed in Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and Marcots, surrounded in a sea of OCPs, which is the Army uniform, obviously. Went through that course, was fortunate enough to get selected as an officer to eventually become essentially go through the Special Forces qualification course and become a detachment commander as a Green Beret officer. That wasn't the path that I wanted to go with. I recognized after coming back from the Afghan deployment that I probably had like a once in a lifetime experience with a shutdown of a combatant theater like that, and I blast being with the boys, carrying a rifle for a living and doing that. I saw that my path, if I remained on the officer route, would eventually end up with me chained to a desk. So I got back in that deployment and went straight to the 3 shop and just sat there as a 3 Alpha, 3 Zulu, knocking out slide decks, looking at training and operations and all that stuff. Didn't enjoy my time there. So I did something that was pretty orthodox. I resigned my commission. So I ended up getting out of the Marine Corps in July of 2022. So I had about 6 to 7 months on my contract left after graduating from selection. July 10th, 2022, I was Captain Gamarra. I promoted. And July 11th, 2022, I was Sergeant E5 Gamarra in the United States Army National Guard. So that was an interesting dynamic. Huge pay cut, right? So like throughout it's kind of like a trend in my career. You know, I haven't looked back once and regretted it. I might regret it a little bit on the 1st and the 15th of the month. But you know, it's been gravy, man. Like I showed up to jump school out at Fort Benning. I literally had never put on an Army uniform before. And I'm walking up and I've got like, you know, my chevrons on and these weird camis. I've got like my Marine Corps deployment patch on and it's just a weird environment. Stepping from being a captain, you know, leading Marines in Afghanistan to, hey, sit down, shut up, go sit over there. So that was an interesting dynamic that was honestly pretty awesome because I was able to be the NCO that I wish I had or had seen as an officer, right? So like a big part of officer development leans on E5s, E6s, E7s, and E8s and E9s and how to make good officers. I'm a firm believer that second lieutenants that aren't Mustangs are absolute slaves to the competence of their staff and COs. And I was fortunate enough to have awesome ones. I was fortunate enough to be around not so good ones. So I saw some awesome examples of staff and CO mentorship for those young officers. So I had the opportunity to do that a little bit through Fort Benning at jump school, graduate there, and immediately check into Fort Bragg to go through the Special Forces qualification course. I ended up being a Special Forces weapons sergeant, so the way the MOSs are breaking down. For all the Marine listeners that are familiar, you've got essentially an ODA, which is an Operational Detachment Alpha, which is a Special Forces team, and then within that team is 12 individuals, right? So you've got 2 medics, which are 18 Deltas, Special Forces medics. You've got 2 weapons sergeant, which are 18 Bravos. It's your MOS designator like 0311 XYZ. You've got 2 Special Forces engineer sergeants, which are 18 Charlies. You've got 2 18 Echoes, which are Special Forces communication sergeants. Then you've got your detachment commander, which is traditionally a captain. You've got your team sergeant, which is usually an E8, and then you've got your EXO, if you will. It's a 180 Alpha. Essentially, it's a Special Forces warrant officer that has had time as a Special Forces enlisted guy, and then goes the warrant route. I recognized, looking at my decision to resign my commission, that I would probably have 2 to 3 years max on a team, and then I would go to the 3 shop, and then go be a company commander and do all that stuff. So I recognized very early on that I wouldn't be able to do what I want for as long as I wanted. With the way I went, I could be on a team for 15 years, as long as my body essentially will hold up. So that's the path I wanted to go. I also had opportunities to go to like all the quote unquote cool guy schools, you know, sniper, CQB, shooting school, all that stuff. So that's the reason why I kind of went this direction. You know, it was really interesting path going through all the courses that I've been through now. You know, as an officer, you're the guy with a map and a compass, and you're doing route planning and doing all that stuff, and you're zeroed in on everything. Whereas, like, now I was faced with the opportunity of being just a rifleman, right? So I got like a ruck on my back, and I'm just moving away with my head down, following a patrol, and or having that influence. So it was pretty cool going through that and being able to kind of impart, you know, my experiences. But yeah, now I just got back from a deployment in Africa about 2 weeks ago, and that was my first SF deployment, and now I'm back on civilian status, doing drill, you know, every 1 week in a month, and then schools and all that stuff that we'll attend. It's a little bit more than your typical National Guard requirement because of just the things we do. But yeah, that's pretty much my background in a nutshell.
Dude, that's crazy.
Yeah,
let me start by saying thank you for your service. I appreciate it. We appreciate it
Thank you.
for the folks and listeners because we have service members, veterans, and civilians listening. So thank you for your service. But I would like to touch. That's a lot. That's going there from officer resigning your commission, going down to the enlisted ranks, and then now you're obviously in the reserves. But
Yep.
throughout all that, there's a lot going on, right? Without pulling the weeds back, peeling the onion back. Those in your circle, how were they affected by all those different types of transitions?
I've moved, I think 7 or 8, maybe 9 times since 2018 joining. So that's a big impact. I've got a little brother that has a terminal lung disease, so like all the moving around is honestly why I kind of chose to go the National Guard route. That way I could be around my family, be a part of my brother's life, and be more present. Um, we'll see how it goes. This is literally like I've been on active duty orders since 2018, even though I'm in the National Guard just because of the deployment and the schoolhouse and all that stuff. Frankly, it's brand new. I've really transitioned out of the military twice, going from the Marine Corps to being a civilian for like a month or two to the Army National Guard, and then now coming off the deployment. So I've actually got 2 transitions under my belt, and it's affected family and friends for sure. It's been a lot of moving around, a lot of deployments, a lot of training cycles. It's hard to keep in touch with your friends. I mean, that's part of it. Like your listeners, whether they're civilians, past or present veterans, it's tough. All my like mentors, like my prior gunnies, my prior master sergeants, sergeant majors, all the enlisted guys thought I was fucking nuts for resigning my commission, but they understood it in the long run, right? They saw their careers of doing 15 to 20 years, and like, why the heck would you do this? And when I sat down and explained it to them, they're like, "Yeah, man, that makes sense. I don't blame you at all." Coming over to Flat Black has been incredible. I mean, there's been some disheartening things. Don't get me wrong. I've been disappointed with how, I'll put it this way: when officers, specifically captains and lieutenants, figure out that I used to be a captain and like I was in Afghanistan leading Marines, they treat me vastly different than when they thought I was an E5 or E6 and I'm staff sergeant now. And that's disappointing because it typically goes from like not a nonchalant, maybe like negative, borderline negative encounter to holy crap, this guy's done more than I have. Um, and now they treat me different. So that's been disappointing. And that's not everybody, right? That's just a handful, but that's definitely been some inversion, if you will.
Yeah, I would like to ask. We talk about pros, cons. No, there's some regrets. Maybe the first and the 15th, like you said, right? That's a big pay cut. But in terms of pros, cons, after actions, and I know you know what I'm talking about. Marine Corps, no comparison. We're all service members serving a greater purpose, higher purpose. But is there some things that you miss wearing this coveted uniform?
So on this deployment, I had the opportunity to work in an embassy a little bit out in Africa. And I got on the deck November 12th of last year, 23. And I was butthurt because I couldn't go to the Marine Corps ball. Because, in my mind, I think it's going to be on the 10th because you got all the MSG Marines at the embassy, right? And I have chills right now thinking about it. And luckily, they had to delay for some reason. They had it on the 14th. And I was able to go to the Marine Corps ball. Granted, it's a squad size element. I think they only have like 13 to maybe 14 or 15 Marines at the detachment. But in the commandant's birthday message, watching, seeing the Marines and put all that stuff, like I still keep up and have better friends in the Marine Corps than I have anywhere else, man. Like wearing the Marpats and having that EGA is, I don't know what it is about us. We're just different. Forgive me for my language, but I don't fucking get it. But we're better at a lot of things. We're worse at some things, but the nostalgia that the Marine Corps has is absolutely incredible. And it doesn't matter what MLS they are. You could be, an admin guy or like an O3 or MARSOC or whatever. It's all there. And I'll give you a little quick story. So going through the qualification course at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, surrounded by Army people, right? Going into the Special Forces qualification course, there's a joke that the hardest part about being Special Forces is either going to BRC, right, the Basic Reconnaissance Course, or just being a Marine. Because, I would say probably over 50% of the dudes going through that course are prior Marines. Like, I don't know anybody from Adam. I just checked in, and one of my buddies like, hey dude, I'm gonna throw a Marine Corps birthday party at my house, and you just imagine like cases of beer and your best friends. So like I didn't know anybody except for that one guy, and like 30 minutes in, it's such a small Marine Corps. Like I know like dudes that these guys know deploy together, blah 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 blah, and it's phenomenal. And like so now I live in Georgia, and that's something like that I plan on doing here is like connecting people and having that camaraderie. Because I'll drive around and see some old guys in EGO's truck or see guys at church, and I think like based off of like your past episodes that you know mental health and suicide's is a big thing in the veteran community, and finding that fulfillment in that community is huge. Yeah, I can't express enough that I love the Marine Corps. I miss the Marine Corps. I don't regret doing what I did, but I still get a little teary eyed every time I see a Marine Corps birthday message or like something nostalgic like that come up. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. I understand. Again, pros and cons to everything. And I say, what is one thing you don't miss from wearing the uniform and transitioning to the Army? Compare and contrast kind of thing.
Yeah. So the one thing that I don't miss is the bureaucracy of being an officer. So I think that goes hand in hand with two conversations, right? So like not only did I change communities to go to another service, but I changed communities to go from like conventional special operations. And for better or for worse, there's definitely pros and cons to the statement I'm about to make. Special operations is different, right? There's a lot of first name basis. There's a lot of like regular border or like baseline disciplines that are allocated towards other focuses, not your one haircut a week, right? Or like not having wizard sleeves and not having non-standard uniform and all that stuff. But the bureaucracy as an officer and having to placate to other people in order to make decisions to appease them, to take care of your Marines. When you're an officer, you're always faced decisions, whether you're in garrison or you're deployed, with making the less worst decision because everybody fucking hates you. I mean, like you cannot. I remember we were at ITX and it's 100 and some odd degrees, and my battery commander went. We had been in the field for like 3 or 4 weeks at this point. Hadn't gone back to Camp Wilson to the PX or anything, and the battalion commander had to go to main side for a meeting, and he came back with a bunch of ice cream sandwiches, and this is a funny story. And he's handing out ice cream sandwiches to all the Marines, and like, thinking that oh, it's going to be boost morale. And then like I'm walking around and I hear Marines bitching that like why wasn't it strawberry? Why wasn't it chocolate? So like no matter what, uh, obviously there's good officers and bad officers. Don't get me wrong. It was just like that in the army. But that's one of the cons I miss. Or the cons to the Marine Corps. And I also think that there's some cons of taking care of Marines. The the bureaucracy of paperwork and administrative ES to do what you want is super difficult. It took me, I think, like right at 18 months to get like one piece of paper signed to be able to go to selection with the Army. And I was a lieutenant, first lieutenant, and like had experience rubbing elbows, and everybody really liked me. I performed pretty well as far as like officers and battalion commanders and all that stuff. And then I cannot imagine what it would be like for a corporal or a lance corporal to try to do that, let alone transfer to another branch. But like try to go to ANS from RSOC or try to go to another career development school. Just having to deal with so many more cogs in the machine. Like, is it right for the first sergeant? This piece of paper is it now going to get past the sergeant major? It's just that stuff is definitely a con, and which occurs in the Army. Pro wise, bar none, the Marine Corps. I'm sorry to Army counterparts, but the Marine Corps is a much better warfighting organization. From planning and trust down to the strategic corporal is infinitely better on the conventional side. It was really interesting going to what I do now because like we would go out to do ranges with partner force or foreign militaries or whatever, and we would drive 2 hours out to a range in the middle of the desert in Africa, no officers within 2 hours, and it's just like an E7 and a couple E6s, working with 100 different African soldiers. So the autonomy that you have in the special operations community is awesome. It's part of the reason why I went over there. But on the flip side, the Marine Corps, if you look at the structure of NCO leadership comparatively to the Army, a platoon sergeant in the Army is an E7. I had an E3 platoon sergeant when I was a platoon commander for like a month or two. Like a whole lance corporal, just salty as hell, just knocking it out the park, right? You know, you got your squad leaders that are corporals. In the Army, you got to be an E5. It was unheard of to have E4 squad leader. So the trust in junior Marines is infinitely higher. Junior enlisted, I should say, is infinitely higher in the Marine Corps than it is in the Army.
And again, it's a double-edged sword, right? You got some things that work out because of it, and then some things because of time and space and maturity and experience, and some things don't, right? But that's it's good gouge. It's good for information for the listeners.
Yeah.
I gotta touch. You said it was transitioning from one branch to another branch, from enlisted to the officer ranks. There's obviously a lot of adversity, a lot of resilience that you got to build, especially for the ones in your circle.
Yeah.
I got to ask, through all this, what's the primary struggles between you and your immediate family in terms of going from the officer to the enlisted, resigning your commission, going into this this MOS where now it's taxing on your time, right? And you want to be around more, you want to be present more, but how do you get those snap-ins per se, and you're being gone away all the time?
So yeah, I got a couple points on that. So I look at time a lot like I look at investments. And when you're at home in garrison, you've got to invest time, like you're investing money, investing capital into your family and your friends, because at some point in the future, you're going to have to cash out because you're going to be gone, whether it's an ITX, a school, or a deployment. So you have to capitalize on that. And frankly, you know, us service members, we get thanked for our service. At the end of the day, we're just hanging out with, you know, our best friends, like blowing shit up or doing whatever we want, having fun. Obviously, there's crappy parts, and like you can sacrifice your life, blah, 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 blah. But the true people that are sacrificing are the mothers, the fathers, the brothers and sisters, the husbands, the wives, and the children, right? So investing into them is first and foremost how you create longevity in your relationships when you're gone. If you don't have that support, that's how you run into issues when you're deployed and your mind's not on the mission set. It's not on doing 5s and 25s when you're getting out of the Vic and you step on an IED. It's on like financial struggles or you know, your wife or something going on with your parents or what have you. So that is huge that you have to absolutely be intentional with, and it's very hard to be intentional with, because coming back from a deployment, coming back from, or just visiting family or doing whatever, it's a different world, man. We speak a different language. Sometimes it's hard to explain because we speak in acronyms, we do all these things. It's hard to relate, and you have to be patient. You have to be intentional with that. It's difficult to do so. I will say that the transition from officer to enlisted, that wasn't an issue. My dad, he retired as an E9 in the Air Force. A, he thought I was nuts for joining the Marine Corps because he wanted me to go to the Air Force and have that life. And B, you know, he didn't want me to resign my commission. But they were more concerned with it being more dangerous going to the special operations world. But they knew it was what's going to make me happy, so that's kind of the way I went, and they supported me from there.
Look, man, I gotta ask. That's kind of like a scope of a brush on top, very broad, not broad per se, but it's a good example of how you face adversity. But let me get some meat and potatoes, so to speak, Hayden. I gotta say, when you're gone so much, and I only speak from experience, gone so much, and then trying to get in to the routine, how has that created friction for you as an individual, as a man, potentially father, husband, a brother, sister, son type of thing?
It creates a lot of friction when you come into whatever your daily routine is. If you're a father or a mother or what have you, your significant other has been holding down the fort. There's like all the way down to like where the dishes go in cabinets, right? Or like getting a kid ready for school. When you show back up, all you're doing is inducing friction into the routine that they already created. So it's not just you, right? You have to be intentional with the conversations you have with that significant other to be able to find where you fit. And I think that's going to be the real gist of what I have to say for that is being intentional and having those conversations. The other aspect that I think you have to pay attention to is being truthful with what happened on deployment. A lot of guys go and do hard things. They go through losing friends. They go through being scared to death or getting shot at, or seeing atrocities. And that's what I learned during my first deployment. Man, being at HKI on the ground, my 19 and 20-year-old Marines went through some of the most horrific examples of human atrocities that I've ever seen. I'm saying, like, we were filtering in refugees where the Taliban had taken like 2 or 3 day old infants and like held them by the ankles and dipped them in vats of hydrochloric acid, having like 3rd-degree burns all over their bodies. And the Marines just had to see it, internalize it, and continue with the mission. Because if they broke right there and then, like, bad things could happen. And that's one thing that I'm very proud of that I did when I came back. Because I sat down and had those intentional conversations and just laid everything out of what happened, what I saw, what I did, what my Marines did. And not that it was cathartic for me, but it got me through it during that 1 or 2 conversations. And then I was over it. That's not the case whatsoever. What it is it gives the scope of perspective to who you're talking to, and whether it's your wife, your mom, or your best friend, or your buddy that wasn't on the deployment with you. From there, they have a lens to be able to better assess and see how and why you react certain ways to certain things, or why you're feeling certain things. It's that intentional trigger mechanism to start the healing process and start the process for getting over the hump for all those weird things. So when you go on a deployment, it's a multifaceted return. Right? You're coming in and do some friction on routines and home life, but it's also multifaceted with like what you're feeling and what your family's feeling, and not only what you went through that was potentially traumatic, but like I can't imagine being a wife or a husband and my loved one going off, and I don't hear from them, but I see the news, and chaos is occurring, and I don't know whether they're alive, whether they're dead, wounded, whatever. I can't imagine going through that. So for the all the vets and all the past and present people that have deployed and will deploy, that's my biggest piece of advice. Be intentional with those conversations. That way you can create an action plan. The Marine Corps teaches you how to live. Like, it gives you step actions on how to clean your rifle, conduct vehicle maintenance, conduct X, Y, and Z. If you take that same approach and just change and adapt that process, that problem framing set to your everyday life and feelings and what have you, you're going to figure it out.
That's actually good gouge, man. I'll tell you what. I'll tell you from experience. Sometimes you become numb because that's the only thing that it's kind of you survive. That's how you survive. Have you ever experienced that numbness in terms of 100%. Friction coming back? Right? What did you do to remove yourself? Because numbness may be a good thing, maybe a bad thing, depending on the situation, mm-hmm. Right? But in terms of relationships to family building and coming back and snapping in, how did you pull yourself out from the numbiness, the internalization of stress mm-hmm. because you had to survive?
So I remember a distinct decision point when I was in Afghanistan, talking about like all the stuff we saw out there. I remember seeing, like, I was on the ground for like an hour and saw essentially an Afghan A&A soldier shoot into a crowd and had some ricochets that hit some very young children. And I see that, witness it happen. It's kind of super weird. First time seeing a kid get hit. And I intentionally made the decision, like, well, I've got to swallow that. I cannot react. So that way I can have a clear mind to make decisions to take care of the Marines and the refugees, right? I accepted the consequences that was something that I was going to have to deal with later on in my life. And it might have been naive to do so then. I would go back and do the same thing and be put in the same position. I do the same thing because right then and there, the lives of my Marines and the lives of the refugees were what's important, right? And have a clear mind to make decisions is vital in that situation. That being said, the repercussions are real. I came back. Indifference and numbness is a thing when you return to home life and you see absolute evil and poverty and death and destruction, and you come back and it's like it's like you time warp. You're in a completely different world. I mean, people are going to Chick-fil-A or going to Walmart upset because the Starbucks barista didn't put enough, vanilla pump in their coffee, and you're like, dude, I just saw like a 3-year-old lose his mom and he was playing soccer like an hour later, right? So like what's your problem? So you get real numb and indifferent, and that's something that you're going to continue to struggle with. I struggle with it to this day. Back coming from Afghanistan, the intentional conversation and allowing myself to feel things when talking to someone that meant a lot to me, that brought the emotion back, right? It allowed me to have emotional reprieve and that mental bounce back to gain those feelings and lose that indifference. But I'll fast forward to today. I come back from Africa where I was seeing like literally mud huts and villages in the middle of the desert and kids that like eat one meal every 3 days and like drink the worst water in the world if they can find it. Coming back here, going to church and being around. So like I'm not in a military town anymore. That's another hard part, right? So like in a military town, you can go to a bar, run into somebody that's been deployed or knows the language. Where I'm at, they have no idea what it means to deploy. They have no idea what it means to be away from your family. While it's extremely patriotic where I live, like literally, I'm looking outside of my window right now, and all my neighbors have American flags up. So it's a super patriotic place. But I'm surrounded by school teachers and bankers and college professors, and it's hard to relate. That's something that I'm struggling with to this day. Finding. I'm going to use the term warfighters. But it doesn't have to be with someone in the military. Even like your run-of-the-mill civilian can have the mindset that we do, and there's people like that. I have friends like that. But it's hard to find, man. It's hard to have gone through all that stuff and relate. And frankly, it's hard for your family too, because case in point, ironically, someone I serve with in the capacity I work with now lives close to me, and speaking with his wife. When he gets deployed, there's no structure, there's no support in the local area other than maybe her family. But when you're on a Marine Corps base and you deploy, there's like FRA, there's a family readiness officer, there's chaplains, there's all these support systems to take care of the kids and the lives that doesn't exist in like the National Guard reservist community. So it's a beast, and I'll take it back to the couple times I've said it. You have to be intentional to talk with the people you care about, and have them help you either work through it or at a minimum just be a sounding board for what you're thinking, what you're going through. Because like if you walk around a Marine Corps base at 5 or 6 in the morning, there's gonna be somebody running or doing something, hiking with a pack on. Here, I'm gonna go do that, but like there's no one else to do it with. It's just a different place, if that makes sense.
It does, man. I appreciate that. I'll
Yeah.
tell you what, there's a lot of rough moments as an individual, as a man, as a father. You could apply all those scenarios to each billet, so to speak, that you hold, or each hat that you hold. We gotta finish on a high note, on a good movement here, some good vibes, because I only, I'm a little short on time here, and I'm sure your time is precious as well. What are you doing now? What do you do now? What do you do when you're not in uniform?
Yep.
How do you get back to service members and their veterans, past service members and their families?
Yeah.
What are you doing now?
So I'm actually a sales director for a defense company. They make or we make load carriage systems for the 240 Bravo, the Carl G, long guns, mortars, things like that. So it's a man-packable system that allows an easier way to manage weight when you're moving and patrolling and doing whatever, and also expedites your replacement time. So like getting the machine gun rack and rolling, or getting the mortar tube set in, base plate, all that stuff. We also do tent systems. I'm sure they've been issued to the Marine Corps. They're like the man pack, like fold out tents that have mosquito nets built in. I'm a sales director for them, so I actually am able to be around the military when I'm not in uniform, which is awesome. Like I'm going to Camp Lejeune next week to first time back since I left in 22, so I'm super excited. But I'm going to go talk to some like battalion gunners and some infantry units and some machine gunners and mortar guys to show them the product, see if we can't help equip Marines to be better and faster warfighters. Ironically, just one tidbit, the Marine Corps always talks about us having crappy equipment in the Marine Corps. Man, the individual unit issue, like all your SIF stuff, is infinitely better for the Marines than it is in the Army. I was going through the Q course and had all the Army stuff, and I drove to Lejeune to like Saigon Sam's and just bought a complete sickish from them, and then took it and just used all that stuff. So that's just an interesting tidbit. But anyways, yeah. So I'm a sales director there. They've been primarily focused on Army customers. I was brought in right before the deployment to be able to tap into the Marine Corps market as well as the special operations market. So, I was super eager to do that. I knew I was transitioning to the civilian world, but I knew I didn't want to always be gone except for 1 week in a month from people like me being around the boys, if you will. So that's what I'm doing now. It's going really well. I thoroughly enjoy it. It gives me the opportunity to be around knuckle draggers like me and have fun with them and be around all the stuff we like, right? In my personal life, I have just, like I said, I've only been back for like a week or two. I can't remember how many days specifically, but I want to do exactly what I told you about with that Marine Corps birthday a couple of years ago, going through the Q course. Whether it's Marine specific or just military in general, I want to get in and do like small group type efforts to help mentor and frankly be mentored, because I'm sure there's a lot that, or I know there's a lot for me to learn from service members that have been in a lot longer than I have. So I'm starting outreach with that, as well as reaching out to some law enforcement entities and firefighting entities for some of the soft skills that we have the benefit of getting in the military, whether it's dealing with trauma or emotional distress or mental resiliency or what have you, and honestly working through putting together some projects for them and potentially doing some stuff with the local agencies and departments around where I live.
That's a lot, Hayden. That's a lot. Again, we're short on time, and
Yep.
I gotta ask, where can they reach you at? If this resonates with them, it's relatable to them. Where can they reach you at? Social media handles, whatever you want to give out, I'll put in the show notes as well. Let me know.
Yeah, for the nature of my job, I'm not really on social media other than LinkedIn. Feel free for anybody to look up my first and last name, which is in the description or the title of the episode. Open. I've helped a couple veterans and working through the transition and finding jobs and resumes and stuff like that. Any of your listeners at all I want to do is be around people that wear the uniform. I don't care if you're what your NOS was, if you deployed, if you didn't deploy, if you're reservist, if you're active duty, whatever. I could care less. Any way I can give back to officers and enlisted alike. I have a unique experience to have time in both hats. So I've done multiple transitions, so more than happy to help anybody through anything at all, whether it's career transitions, mental toughness, emotional stuff that they've gone through. Reach out and I'll be an open book.
I appreciate that. Hey, I know, again, time is precious, and I appreciate it. Listeners, if you're listening, you don't get paid to listen. I don't get paid to run my mouth. We're just having two service members having a conversation about life. And again, I appreciate your time. Thank you for your service. And I would say the floor is yours here for the next 30 to 1 minute, 30 seconds to a minute. Talk to those who are not here, those service members that are not here, the 22 to 44 daily. Tell them, talk to them, speak to them right now and say, hey, what you were going through, give them a tool for the toolbox if they still had that opportunity to. And the ones that are listening, the ones that are thinking about it, here's a tool for your toolbox. The floor is yours.
Yeah, so I think that if you have not had those ideations or thoughts, either you have like a very privileged life or you're lying to yourself. I've been there. I've had, I've thought about having a pistol in hand, so it's very very familiar to me. What I would recommend to anyone out there is everybody says, talk to somebody, be there for somebody that's thinking about that. I look at that as, you look at TCCC, your combat casualty care, it's throwing a tourniquet, right? It's stopping massive hemorrhaging, is having that one conversation to hopefully help stop that ideation in the moment. While that fixes that, my recommendation is to be intentional with your conversations and go have more of them. Don't just let the straw fall that breaks the camel's back. Prevent all the heaps of straw falling in general. You need to be able to address it just like TCCC, right? The best medicine in a gunfight, or if you're wounded, is suppressive fire. Then you stop massive hemorrhaging with a tourniquet, and then you get off the X, and then you go to a higher level of care, right? You're going to your surgical facility or out wherever. Focus on that higher level of care before it comes to be a problem. don't be reactive, be proactive, because the moment that you let all the stuff in life, stressors or what have you, mount up, it's going to mount up quick. And then all of a sudden, you potentially make a decision that you can't come back from. So that'd be my advice. And for everybody listening, obviously always reach out to your loved ones and things like that. But be intentional. Don't let it mount.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it for the words of wisdom, ladies and gentlemen. Hayden Gamarra. I hope I said that right. Gamarra.
You did.
I was
Yeah.
second guess myself. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Pit Talk, Pulling Pits and Opinions with your host, Gunny G and Hayden Gamarra. Follow, like, subscribe everywhere you get your podcasts and on all social media platforms. Service member, self-service member, period. If you know, you know. Let me know how I'm doing. Any criticism is good criticism. Ladies and gentlemen, we out. Hayden.
Appreciate it, brother. Thank you.
I appreciate your time, man. I'll talk to you soon. Thank you.
Sounds good. Yeah, man.